Yes, and no. It's a little complicated. Let me explain. This is an original Nintendo Entertainment System, which is almost 40 years old. Now, you're probably thinking, why would I want to buy a 40-year-old piece of hardware today? Well, the game library for one. You have amazing games like Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, The Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy, Mega Man, Metal Gear, Metroid. So many classic games that not only hold up remarkably well, they're still getting new releases even today. Now, I want to make it clear that I personally think this is the best way to experience these games, by playing them on the original hardware. I mean, they were made for this, right? But there's definitely a few things you should think about before buying one. Now, we won't be discussing emulation in this video. It has its own pros and cons, but that's a topic for another time. Let me know if it's something you'd be interested in. But for now, we will only be talking about playing on the original console as it is. And the biggest issue noticeable right away is this: they just won't fit together. Now, there's a couple solutions to this. The first is to use an adapter similar to this one. There, now everything should work perfectly, right? Wrong. You see, a lot of adapters introduce something called input lag. This means that there's a delay between when you press a button and when something happens on screen. And in games where timing is really important, this can be a massive issue. Also, for some reason, a lot of adapters will stretch the screen to make it fit a display it was never meant to be played on. So if you do get one, just make sure to check the reviews and comments, because not all of them are like this. Another problem is the graphics. They look terrible, and you might be thinking, Flynn, of course they look terrible. It's an old game from 40 years ago. But that's actually not the case. You see, these games were made specifically for CRT TVs. Yes, I'm talking about that old crappy TV that's still in your grandparents' spare room. But not only do the games look and feel so much better to play on here, they were designed specifically around the limitations of these older TVs. The controls are instantly responsive, and the lower frame rate doesn't feel anywhere near as bad as it does on a modern TV or a gaming monitor. Another reason to play on a CRT goes back to the aspect ratio thing. Now, this is me playing Super Mario Bros. 3 on my gaming monitor. Do you see this weird visual glitching around the edges? This is because the edges would be cut off by older televisions. Developers not only knew about this, it was designed this way. They would actually use this area as a buffer to load in textures, and it's not the only game to do this. Okay, great. Well, that's easy enough. Let's go buy an old tube TV, and what the hell is this? And this brings me to probably the biggest downside. You see, retro gaming has really taken off over the last couple years, and while that's great, the market is flooded with so many people wanting to sell their old stuff for ridiculous amounts of money. But you can get really good deals buying secondhand. Personally, I would recommend checking out your local game store. You can usually find things for at or just below market value, and you're very unlikely to get scammed. For example, I got my NES for around $70, and it came with a controller, the cables, and it was cleaned and tested. And most things from a game store come with a 30-day warranty, and you might actually end up needing that, because this brings us to another problem. You see, this is old electronics, and sometimes it breaks. Not only will you probably have to replace the batteries in an older cartridge in order to actually save your games, but you may have to try loading them up 4 to 5 times because they just won't work, no matter how many times you try blowing on the cartridge or rubbing alcohol on it. But once you finally get everything working, and on a CRT, which I don't actually have at the moment, but I have played on one, the experience just can't be beat, not even by high-end emulation. And the experience itself is probably the most important thing that I get out of all this. I mean, think about it. In my hands, I'm holding a very important piece of video game history. Now, I've always been a bit of a history nerd, and Nintendo basically saved the entire gaming industry with the release of this console. Like, without it, you wouldn't have PlayStation or Xbox, and gaming today, as we know it, wouldn't even exist. And this is why old games and consoles are starting to bring a lot of value to collectors. And there's a good chance that following current trends, the prices will probably only go up from here. So if you want to experience history and have a really fun time doing it, there's no better time than now to jump into retro gaming. Thanks for watching.